All right, David, if you want to go ahead and take it away, and thank you so much for being here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amy. I'm really glad that you all are here today because we're going to talk about Social Security disability benefits, right? Definitely a topic that is very relevant, not only to folks who receive services through Gilda's Club, but many other organizations, right? Anybody that's kind of facing maybe a challenging time in their life as it relates to medical conditions and whatnot. And so on this slide, you see a little bit of everyone, and that's pretty intentional because Social Security really does affect us or is a part of our life's journey in different ways, right? So from the time we're born, that Social Security number is issued, to when we start working, and then of course looking at benefits, retirement, survivor, disability benefits. And so, of course, we're going to talk most about those latter two here today. And so, let's see. Okay, there we go. There we go. So, who is this guy? Why is he qualified to even be doing this presentation today? Well, you see, I have on a nice jacket in that pic. That was great. I like green. I don't know if it's my favorite color or not, but but I work as the senior public affairs specialist here in the Kansas City area. We do events like this for the four-state region. And I got my start with the agency about 20 years ago as a bilingual claim specialist. So the very person that you would communicate with if you're filing a claim, for benefits. I'd be processing that claim, helping you understand what your benefits would look like, et cetera. And I did that for about the first 5 years of my career. Then I spent some time as a supervisor in one of our local offices. And then the remainder of my career really has been in the public affairs and training realm. So getting out, engaging with audiences, whether it be in person or virtually, right? And then helping train new claim specialists all across the nation on our policies and procedures and things like that. So I come to you with a lot of technical expertise, but also I know how to make it plain, and like make it so that you can kind of understand, what you need to do and what your options are. So yeah, so that's a little bit about my background. And today, of course, we always have a disclaimer at the beginning of our presentations, just because, what I'm sharing is current as of today, but sometimes things can change, right? And so our website, if you're not very familiar with it, um, we definitely recommend that you spend some time, right, to become more familiar with it, so that you can get up-to-date information, right? And so, what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to start out with just a very basic overview of benefits, just kind of taking a macro look at Social Security. And then we'll focus more on disability benefits, understanding the difference between Social Security and SSI, because sometimes those terms are used interchangeably. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to apply for benefits. We'll also talk a little bit about survivor benefits today, right? The fact is, death does happen, right? And so we want to make sure that those who are left behind are prepared, right? And knowing what they need to do. And we'll talk a little bit about online services too, right? We want to make sure that you know how to do business with us, and especially in a way that can maybe save you a lot of time, or a trip to an office. There's a lot of things that you can do online with us, and we want to make sure that you're familiar with that. And then, of course, as Amy's indicated, we will have time for a Q&A at the end. And so when we're talking about Social Security, it's important to really kind of think about how it all gets started, right? It starts with the Federal Insurance Contributions Act, or FICA. This is federal legislation that says wherever you work, a portion of your gross wages will go towards your eligibility for Social Security benefits and Medicare coverage, and your employer is going to match your contribution, right? So a total of 15.3% of your gross wages goes towards your eligibility for benefits, and the larger portion of that goes towards your eligibility for the cash benefits, right? So retirement, disability, survivor benefits. Okay? And a smaller portion goes towards Medicare coverage. And so when we're talking about who gets benefits from Social Security, quite a few people, right? Quite a lot. These numbers, I'm always impressed when I look at these numbers, no matter how, I've been doing these presentations for years, and it's a big program, right? We are responsible for issuing benefits to a lot of individuals. So about 65.5 million people receive some type of a Social Security benefit, whether it's retirement, survivor, disability, or dependents like spouses or minor or disabled children. Okay. So now the large portion of this number are retirees, right? So most folks who get benefits from Social Security are retirees. But you also see some smaller portions of the pie here, right? You see a sliver for SSI, um, that kind of that greenish, little larger piece there is for SSI. So about 4.9 million people receive an SSI payment. SSI is a needs-based program. So in order to qualify, you have to have limited income and resources. And we're going to talk a little bit more about SSI in a bit. And then there's about 2.5 million people, that smaller portion of the pie here, that receive both, right? So their Social Security benefit is low enough, right? Below the benefit maximum payment amount of SSI, and then that means that they would qualify for an SSI payment too. Okay, so we just like to just kind of have that big picture view of who receives benefits from Social Security. And ideally, Social Security is not meant to be the only thing that people rely on, right? When they become disabled or, when they retire, hopefully there are other things that they can draw on, savings and investments, pension, other income. But Social Security really is kind of that foundational element, right? It's a big part of a person's financial future. So all the more reason to kind of understand what that looks like, right? So within the context of disability, right? It's meant to be there when the unexpected happens, right? People want to work, but sometimes things happen, right? And so what are we talking about when it comes to the amount of a disability benefit, right? Well, as of December of last year, the average monthly disability benefit is, just a little over $1,400 a month. Right. So of course you're going to have people who might get less than that. You'll also have people who might get more than that. Depends on their earnings record, right? But either way, right, the disability benefit alone is not not enough to kind of keep you above that federal poverty level, right? We know that $1,400 a month doesn't go that far, depending on your expenses, right? And so, but it is a big portion. And so when we're thinking about who gets, kind of who might be eligible for benefits and when might they receive them. So about 90% of workers, right? So we're talking about people age 21 through 64, are covered for a Social Security disability benefit. So meaning they've worked enough, they've paid enough into Social Security before they become disabled to be eligible for a benefit, right? So most folks are, right? And about 25% of the folks who are 20, in their 20s today will develop a disability, right? And be entitled to benefits before they reach their full retirement age, right? So that's a pretty significant portion. And the average age of workers with a disability is 55 and 9 months, right? So about 56 years old. So, you know, just kind of it's always good to kind of step back and take a look at, wait, how many people are really getting benefits and how does this really impact us, right? So, when we're talking about Social Security disability insurance, sometimes you might hear the acronym SSDI, right? And this is referring to, again, a benefit that's payable based on how much a person has worked and paid into Social Security, but also they must be unable to perform substantial work activity. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a second. But that inability to work must be because of a disabling condition, right? And there's nothing really partial or temporary about it. Like it's not like Aflac, or kind of short-term disability. It is definitely meant to be somewhat more of a permanent situation, right? And so who can qualify? If an individual has a condition that is expected to last at least 12 months or more, or be terminal in nature, to where it's so acute it's going to result in them passing. And an individual has to be younger than full retirement age, right? So sometimes we get questions, well, I'm 66 or I'm 67, and depending on the person's date of birth, they may already be at their full retirement age or beyond it. Can I still file for disability benefits? It's like, no, there's no disability benefits payable after your full retirement age. And if someone is filing for disability and maybe they are working in some capacity, right? Maybe they went from full-time to part-time work, or something like that. Then we have to look at how much they are making from work, right? And so if they are having monthly gross earnings that are above these amounts here on the slide, then generally speaking, they're not going to be eligible for a disability benefit. Okay, so here in 2025, if they're making more than $1,620 in gross earnings, and they are someone who is not filing based on blindness, right, some other type of disabling condition, and then if they are filing based on blindness, the limit is a little higher. So they can make up to $2,700 in gross earnings per month. Now, there are some other things that we might look at in this situation, right? Somebody's filing and they're working in some capacity. We need to know if they might be getting special assistance, to do their work. Maybe they're working at a lower standard of productivity. Maybe they're being given easier work duties or more breaks or things like that, or other type of special assistance, right? We would want to know about that because that might affect how we look at their work activity. Okay? And then for all Social Security benefits, right, a person has to have worked enough and paid enough into Social Security to be eligible for a benefit, right? So for Social Security disability, I liken it to car insurance, right? You know how you pay your premiums every month for car insurance, right? And you have coverage. But if you end up not paying those premiums, your coverage is going to lapse, right? So, and then if you get in an accident, you wouldn't be covered, right? Because if your premium lapsed or your coverage lapsed. Similar fashion when we're talking about Social Security disability, except your coverage doesn't run out that quickly, right? So for all of us, maybe that have been working up until today, our earnings that we have on record would likely cover us for the next 5 years, right? So if we didn't work anymore from now, and we filed for disability 2 years down the road, we would be covered based on our earnings. Okay. Well, that's just kind of the basics of what we're talking about when we talk about Social Security disability or SSDI. Okay. And whenever we're talking about Social Security benefits, we're always interested in anyone else who might be eligible for benefits on the record. Right? So when you file an application, we're going to ask, do you have any minor children? And by that, we mean any children who are younger than 18 or younger than 19 if still in high school. We also want to know, do you have any disabled adult children? And what we mean by that are any children who were found to be disabled before the age of 22. We also want to know if you're currently married and if you were previously married and how those marriages ended, right? If they ended in divorce or if they ended in death, right? And we'll talk about survivor benefits here in a little bit. Okay, but for right now, everyone is alive. Okay. So when we're talking about spouse or divorced spouses, they could be eligible for a benefit based on your earnings record, right? Based on your benefits. And so, what does that look like? Well, to be eligible, first you have to be of age. So, age 62 is kind of the earliest age for any type of a spouse or divorced spouse or a retirement benefit. Okay? If not, then they could be entitled earlier if they're caring for a minor or disabled child. If you're filing as a divorced spouse, a few other things also have to be true, right? You have to be either of age or caring for a minor disabled child, but you also must be unmarried at the time that you're filing as a divorced spouse. The marriage has to have lasted at least 10 years. And your ex-spouse, meaning, the person upon whose record you're filing for benefits, has to be of age, 62, or entitled to disability benefits. Okay. So again, this what we're talking about here is just if you're filing for a benefit as a spouse or divorced spouse, right? Whatever you're due on your own record is kind of a separate conversation, right? Okay. So we're always interested in anybody else who might be eligible for benefits on the record. Now let's talk a little bit about SSI. SSI stands for Supplemental Security Income. And as I kind of mentioned in the opening, this is a federal program that we manage. Social Security manages it, and it provides monthly payments to individuals who have limited income and resources. Right? And so, who can receive SSI? Anyone who is 65 or older, as well as any age, including children who are blind or who have some type of a disability. Right. But the kicker with SSI is that you have to have very limited income and resources. For Social Security, it doesn't matter if you have $1 million in the bank or zero, right? It's not needs based, it's based on a person's earnings record and if they're insured. But SSI, limited income and resources. That's the first thing that we're looking at. So if you are working with someone, right, and you're trying to help them understand the difference between Social Security disability and SSI, right? We have this kind of chart in here as kind of a cheat sheet, if you will. So on the left-hand side, of course, it's focusing on how Social Security is, based on how much a person has worked and paid in. Um, that's how you become insured, and who can receive benefits, not only the worker, but also eligible family members, right? So those minor disabled adult children, spouses in some instances. But SSI, there's no family benefits payable through SSI, right? The payment is only made to the individual. And again, that income and resource guidelines or factors are at play when we're talking about SSI. Okay. So when we're talking about disability, right, this is the definition of disability for an adult. And this definition applies whether you are filing for Social Security disability or SSI, right? It's the same definition of disability between the two programs. And the Social Security Act defines disability as someone who cannot work due to a severe medical condition that has lasted or is expected to last at least 1 year or result in death. Okay, so it has to be either have that has to be a condition that's kind of somewhat permanent or severe enough to last that long or be terminal. And that condition must prevent them from doing substantial gainful employment. Now, that substantial is somewhat measured by the dollar amounts that we looked at earlier, right? The $1,620 for a non-blind individual, and $2,700 for someone who is filing based on blindness. So that's kind of one part of looking at the substantial gainful employment aspect. But also, the medical examiners are going to be looking to see, does this condition or these conditions keep this person from doing the work that they did before? And does it prevent them from adjusting to other types of work? Right. So it's not just, can somebody work right now? Right. We're really looking at a person's ability to work and adjust to other work. And we're going to take a closer look at the disability determination process here in just a little bit. Okay, but um, a lot of people uh, don't necessarily understand how the role of, or the ability or inability to work is such an integral component of the decision. And so sometimes when we do these presentations, a lot of people ask, when should I apply? When's the right time to file? Because you might be trying to figure things out, or your prognosis might be pretty good and you don't want to file prematurely or things like that, right? We really recommend that folks file as soon as they feel that they become disabled, that they're unable to work substantially, because processing an application in some instances can take 6 to 8 months or longer, right? Obviously, for more maybe acute terminal conditions, the decision process might be quicker, but it can take up to 6 to 8 months depending on the circumstances. And of course, anything that you can do to tell us about your conditions, your medical providers, any updates as your application, is pending, that can, help expedite the process, right? And so some of the links here that you see on the slide and moving forward are just kind of links to portions of our website where you can go to get more specific information. And so what happens, right? You've decided, that you wanted to file. You either submitted your application online, or maybe you did it over the phone or in person in one of our offices. And our first step as in the Social Security office, right, is to review your application. One, to make sure you're insured for benefits. You've worked, you've paid enough, you have enough recent earnings. We want to make sure, all, in a sense, all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, right? That we have the information from you. We'll also, if there's work involved, it's responsible for us to, we have to review your work activity to see where it falls, with those guidelines that I mentioned earlier. And then if we find that you're not working substantially, right, and we've got the medical information from you, you told us about your doctors and hospitals and medications and whatnot, then we send your claim to the Disability Determination Service, also known as DDS, office in your particular state, right? They are the agency that's responsible for making a medical determination, right? No one in the local office is making a medical determination on your claim, right? And so they complete that initial disability determination decision. The DDSs are comprised of doctors and disability specialists, right? They are trained, right, to make these medical decisions. And they are the ones that will ask for the medical records from the doctors and hospitals and folks that you tell us about in your application, right? So they use that medical evidence, from wherever you've told us about. And there's a couple of things at play when we receive a disability application, right? One of those is the compassionate allowances process. And this is a way for us to quickly identify diseases and other medical conditions that invariably qualify. Like, you know, based on the medical evidence, it is very clear if someone's been diagnosed with this condition that they already meet the medical criteria, right? So that means our examiners don't have to do as much medical development, and analyzing this or that, right? It can help us make a decision quicker. Now, we still have to evaluate the ability to work factor, okay? But the medical portion of the claim can be quicker if there's a disease, or a condition that's on this list. And so I didn't, the formatting, I think, on this slide kind of came out a little weird, but hopefully you can see the web link at the bottom. It says ssa.gov/compassionate allowances. So on that page of our website, you can see the list. You can search for the conditions. I think there's probably about somewhat over 250 conditions that are a part of the list there. So if you're diagnosed with a condition, that's kind of a spot where you could go to see, is my condition on this list, right? And it also gives some information kind of about this process. Additional conditions are added to the list as they are reviewed and kind of approved. So there that can be something to check out. Another thing that we are always concerned about as well is if someone is a veteran and if they have received some type of a disability rating from the VA. That information can be used as part of our disability determination process. Social Security's determination process is different and separate from the VA, but there's still a lot of good medical information that we can use, right? So we do encourage folks to let us know if they're getting care through the VA. And if you want to learn more about kind of what the medical examiners, um, how they evaluate, right, a disability claim, what's their kind of protocol or criteria that they use. There is the Social Security Blue Book. Um, that was the name given to it because when we actually printed copies of it, it was blue. So that's where that comes from. But you can get it online now, right? And this is really their Bible, if you will. It gives the criteria for what they're looking for when a person says they've been diagnosed with this particular condition. It talks about what the medical evidence needs to show, right? When we get those medical records, as opposed, for XYZ condition. And so there are situations where it might be beneficial for you to have a conversation with your medical provider to make sure that maybe things are charted correctly, documented, appropriately with your condition, right? Especially if you know that you're filing for disability. Okay, so this is where there can be some great information there in that regard. And so we kind of all of that for the build up to how is a disability determination made, right? Well, there's a 5-step process, and the medical examiners first are looking to see if you're working, right? And that kind of emphasizes what I was talking about earlier. If you're working, then we have to evaluate your current work activity. Are you working above those dollar amounts that we saw? If so, is there any kind of support or special expenses that you have, right, that we need to take into account? If one, we determine that you're not working substantially, then we're going to look to see, is your medical condition severe? Is it expected to last 12 months or more? Is it a terminal situation? Right? Does the evidence show that your medical condition or conditions are severe? Then in step 3, we're also looking to see, based on the medical evidence we receive, does that evidence or the documentation of your conditions, does that line up with those impairments that are described in the Blue Book? right? Is there a connection between the two? And then in steps 4 and 5, we go back to that concept of work, right? Based on this evidence, is it reasonable to think that this person can go back to the work that they did before in some capacity, or um, or can they adjust to any other type of work? Right. So this is kind of involved. I think most folks don't understand that this is what is at play, right? When folks file for disability, a lot of us just think, oh, well, I've got this condition. The doctor's telling me I can't work anymore. That's it. I should be able to get it, right? And so it's a little more, involved than that, right? So that's why it's kind of good when I talk about like medical evidence and documentation. Any things that you can have to support your claim can be helpful, right? In that regard. And so medical examiners have gotten all this evidence. They've reviewed things based on this 5-step process, right? And what happens, right? Well, you'll be informed of the decision. The agency, DDS, makes that determination. If approved, then the DDS will send that claim back to Social Security to say, yeah, this person has been approved. Go ahead and process their claim, right? And then that's when we get to send you an approval letter, an award notice, shows you how much you're going to get, when your payments start, all that kind of jazz, right? But, there are situations where folks are not approved the first time around, right? And if so, the letter will be pretty detailed, and it's going to say exactly why. The letter is going to say, we received medical evidence from these sources, you know, you alleged these conditions, based on the evidence we reviewed, we found that da 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 da. There will be some helpful details there. It's not just a red stamp, no, and next type of thing, right? So we encourage folks to really kind of look at that notice, because the information in there might be helpful if you want to appeal that decision, right? And anyone who's denied has the right to appeal the decision. It needs to be submitted within 60 days of the date on the notice. Filing that appeal online obviously is kind of a quick way to do it, right? But of course, the forms can be submitted to your local office. They can be mailed or faxed. And there are a few levels of the appeal process. Okay? So the reconsideration phase is where you say, hey, I want you to reconsider that decision, right? Kind of just building on that word there. Your claim goes back to the Disability Determination Services Office. A different examiner looks at any new evidence that might be there, um, looks at, if you have any new conditions, changes in your conditions, new medical sources, and makes a new decision based on, any information there. If you're denied at the reconsideration phase, then you have 3 more opportunities to appeal the decision. The next one is you can request a hearing before an administrative law judge, right? And as that sounds like, it's definitely a more involved process than the initial and the reconsideration phases. It is a legal proceeding. Um, you your case is reviewed before an administrative law judge. There might be more in-depth review of maybe your vocational abilities. There might be different medical consultants or experts that are asked to give, information about your conditions. It's a pretty involved process, and it can take up to a year to have a hearing before an administrative law judge. If you're denied at the hearings level, you can ask that the appeals council review the decision that was made at the hearings level, right? Sometimes they find that there were additional things that needed to be explored or reviewed, so they would send it back, for additional actions. And then similarly, at the federal court level, you can also appeal there, and that's a similar kind of review. Their goal in those last two phases is to review what has been done before and determine if additional actions are needed. Okay, that's really the purpose of those levels. You do not have to have a lawyer to file an appeal. You have the right to do that without representation. However, there can be some advantage sometimes, maybe to having some type of a either an appointed representative or like a disability advocate, right? There can be some advantage to that. And when it comes to the hearings level, there's usually an opportunity for you to attend the hearing, whether that's in person or there are virtual and remote options may also be available, right? Because sometimes distance or might be an issue or just your own condition, just might be an issue. Now, sometimes when we do these presentations, people will ask, is it okay to try to work, right? What after I get disability benefits? Like I've had them for a while, but my condition has gotten better. And yes, it is possible to work and receive disability benefits. But there are some special rules in place, right, that allow individuals to keep their benefits and their Medicare coverage while testing their ability to work, right? So what this means is we have to review your work activity, right? If you are receiving disability benefits, um, and you want to go back to work, you do need to report your work activity to us on a regular basis, right? Because you may be overpaid depending on what your earnings are each month, depending on the nature of your work activity, right? So we don't have time today to really kind of go in deep here, but when you go to our website, either and I'll kind of show a snapshot of our website later, but you can easily search for some our disability publications that talk about this. One of our main publications is Working While Disabled, right? And it shares information on how we review your work, what your earnings limits are, things like that. And then, of course, the other two sites there, ssa.gov/work and ssa.gov/redbook, right? The blue book is for the medical professionals, determination. The red book is for the whole suite of um, work incentives, right? While a person is receiving disability, right? So good resources there, right? If you're helping with folks. When you file an application too, we're also going to ask you if you want to tell us about up to 3 people who could step in and manage your benefits for you if the need arose, right? Let's say you lose your mental faculties, for some reason, or your condition is so severe that you can't visit an office, or you're not able to communicate. You can proactively tell us up to 3 individuals who could serve as a representative payee for you. That's our agency's term for kind of appointing someone to manage your benefits and your Social Security affairs. Right. So you don't have to tell us, but there's an option there when you file an application. You can do that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about survivor benefits, right? Death happens, and so that can mean some additional benefits when we're talking about Social Security. So on this slide, you see some of the same categories that we looked at before, right? We want to know if there are any surviving children, whether that be minors, right, under 19, or disabled adult children who are found to be disabled before age 22. We also want to know if there are any Surviving spouses, right? Widows or divorced widows. And this is where things are a little different, right? You could be entitled as a widow or a divorced widow as early as age 60. That's a full 2 years earlier than a retirement benefit on your own record. If you're a disabled widow or disabled divorced widow, you could be entitled as early as age 50. And then at any age, if you're caring for a minor or disabled child. So when we do these presentations, sometimes, we people ask us about remarriage. And yes, it is possible. But after age 60 is the goal, right? So if you're not wanting to mess up your potential entitlement on a previous spouse's record, make them wait until age 60, right? Okay. So kind of a weird way to look at it. But remarriage after age 60 would not affect your ability to file on a previous spouse's record. And in some instances, dependent parents may be eligible for benefits, right? So if their child passes away, but they would have to show that they were dependent upon their child for at least half of their support. That's kind of rare. We don't see those claims a whole lot, but sometimes it does happen. Okay? So just a little comparison here, right? I've kind of teased these out throughout the presentation here, but on the left-hand side are the basics for while everyone is alive, right? To be entitled as a spouse, age 62 is the earliest. The most, the highest benefit that you could get is 50% of your spouse's maximum benefit amount, right? And then when we're talking about a survivor benefit, the benefit is usually higher, okay? Pays more, right, as a survivor benefit does. And you could start receiving benefits earlier. So you could receive that survivor benefit first and then maybe switch to your own retirement benefit later. Things to think about, right? In our presentations where we talk more specifically about retirement benefits, we go a little bit more in depth about what spouse benefits look like. Okay. But we don't necessarily have time for that today. And so that kind of leads us to our website. Hopefully, you all have had an opportunity to kind of peruse our website before. Maybe you've gone on there to look for some information. But this is our homepage, and hopefully, the words that jump out to you the most are prepare, apply, and manage, right? Because that's exactly what we want folks to be able to do when they visit our site. And so we don't have time to go through all the things on our website today, but at the top is really where you can really kind of get to where you need to go. We have drop down menus when you want to learn more about benefits, when you want to learn more about Medicare, or maybe you need to update your card or record, right? Your earnings record. You can also use our search window there. Maybe you're not sure what you're quite looking for, but you want to type in a keyword. Our search engine is pretty robust. It's pretty good, right? A high chance that you're going to get exactly what you need within the first few results. Okay. And um, great portions of our website to go to if you want copies of our publications, right? ssa.gov/pubs, right? You can find all kinds of good publications about all of our benefits and services. And then if you need a form, let's say there's a form you need to complete, somebody's asking you and you need another copy, or you just at least want to get familiar with it, right? You can check out a lot of our forms there. And all of this is free, right? If you're somewhere and they're trying to charge you for something related to Social Security, nope, that's not our site, right? And so, aside from those basic things on our website, which are free to use, you don't need an account or anything. But there are some additional things, services behind the My Social Security account, right? And hopefully you all have created one already, right? And been in there and kind of checked it out. But if you haven't, It's a very safe and secure way to get your information when you need it. So you're not waiting unnecessary amounts of time on the phone or, trying to visit one of our offices for something that you could really get in just a couple of minutes, right? Or maybe a couple of seconds, right? So we're going to take a little bit of a closer look here at the account. And if you're creating an account or signing in for the first time, this is a screen that you will see, right? And especially if you're creating an account for the first time, you will be asked to verify your identity through login.gov, right? And login.gov is a third-party identity verification site. Many government agencies are using either login.gov or ID.me as part of that extra layer of security, right? Extra layer to make sure that, yep, the right person is accessing this account. And so if you're creating an account for the first time, you're going to be directed there. And then this is what that login.gov screen, that initial screen would look like, right? You'll need an email address and a phone number. And then after you create that login.gov account, you'll be redirected back to our website, right, for additional steps. So, if you've already created an account, you're probably familiar with this, but you might be helping a family member out or a loved one out with this. And so that's why we like to kind of talk about that process. And so once you're in your account, then of course, if you're not receiving benefits, the biggest advantage is to making sure that you look at your Social Security statement. Look at those benefit estimates. If you file for disability today, how much would you get? How much could your family receive? You know, you can also check your application status, right? So you filed your disability application a few months ago. You're kind of wondering what stage is it at? What's going on, right? You can do all of that through the account. And then, of course, when you're receiving benefits, there's additional advantages. Changing your direct deposit address, phone number, getting benefit verification letters, things like that. Right? And if you need a replacement Social Security card, you can do that through your account, right? So definitely an advantage to having an account if you can. And when you log in, this is kind of a snapshot of what you'll see, right? This is a view for someone who has not filed for benefits yet, right? So their name in the top right-hand corner, messages, preferences options there at the top, and then you can print, save a copy of your statement, look at retirement ready fact sheets, things like that, and then see if you worked enough, paid enough into Social Security, are you eligible? And talking about your Social Security statement, right? This is a kind of a new design. We updated it a few years ago now, but much more streamlined, maybe than the ones that you remember receiving in the earlier years, right? We want people to be able to quickly review and access their information, and if they need more information about a particular topic, we've got links, on the statement where you can kind of dig in on our website and get additional info. We recommend everybody review their earnings record, right? Because that's what we're using to determine how much your benefits are. If there are earnings missing from a particular year and you worked that year, we want to make sure we get that updated, you know? We don't want to shortchange anyone, right? So we may need to see proof of your earnings from a particular year. Right? And then when it comes time to file for benefits, you can file for Social Security retirement, spouse, Medicare, and disability benefits online. And in some cases, you can also file your SSI application online. All right. So we know not everybody's going to be able to file online. That's okay. There are other options. But if you are, let's say you are age 62, and so you would be eligible for a retirement benefit, but you're disabled, too. Yeah, you got something going on. You can file both for retirement and disability in the same application. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to get both benefits, right? But you could receive a retirement benefit first while a decision is being made on your disability application, right? So something to think about. Not everybody falls in that category, but it's good to know. Some people think it can only be one or the other. When it comes to payment, that's true, right? But you can file for both at the same time. And then, if you're unable to complete the application online, you can always call us to schedule an appointment. Now, that appointment might be a little far out, depending on appointment availability in your local office. So it may not be maybe as quickly as you'd like, but you can call us to schedule an appointment. Other than that, feel free to follow us on social media. We post good content, very relevant to kind of our benefits and our services. We make no guarantees on the comments on our posts, as as you can attest to with looking at anything on social media these days. But the content that we post, is meaningful and relevant. We're just trying to be where people are, right? And our YouTube page has some great videos that talk about the disability application process, determination process.